I'm saying is that I'm well aware of all the monetary mechanisms, how United States de facto functions today as what a good Greek economist called Varoufakis, I think, calls Minotaur. Like, do you know that for the last 40 years, from Nixon era, United States need to function $1 billion per day from other countries. And it's precisely through this money then being invested on Wall Street, through all that stuff, that they succeed in doing this without repaying the debts and so on and so on. So I have no illusions here. What I'm only saying is that, and I follow here my good friend Frederick Jameson in his short book on Capital. Did Boitiempo also publish it or will? Not yet, okay. Where Frederick Jameson says the same thing when he emphasizes how it is absolutely crucial today to rethink, change, and expand the notion of exploitation. For example, Jameson even proposes a crazy move of including permanently unemployed into exploited, in the sense that he claims unemployment is no longer today the old unemployment about which Marx was talking, this reserve army, manipulated, and so on and so on. More and more, the whole strata, the whole groups are getting permanently unemployed. Unemployment has today an incredibly stronger structural role. Whole countries are in a symbolic sense unemployed, in the sense that they are proclaimed rogue countries and simply excluded. Of course, this exclusion is always inclusion. For example, Congo is presented as a crazy rogue state. Yes, but I don't think there is in the entire world a country more included in global capitalism than Congo. You know that the minerals used in all our digital machines come from there, and so on and so on. So I'm aware of all of this. All I'm saying is that if you simply dogmatically insist on some working class fundamentalism, only hard workers really create value, then then the moment you get then it's a problem how to account for so-called third world state wanting to profit from their natural wealth. I think, again, my theory here is, again, by some economists whom I appreciate very much. I developed this, again, in the Year of Dreaming Dangerously book, that today, I like very much this theory. It's a simple one. We are, in a way, partially returning from profit to rent. For Marx, at the beginning was rent for the land, and then with the development of capitalism, more and more rent goes to profit. I claim that today, more and more, rent is the source of wealth. And the example I use is these mega rich people, the new digitally rich people. A stupid, simple example. Take Bill Gates. How did he become, okay, a Mexican guy beat him, not the most wealthy, the second. You must use very artificial tricks to explain how he extra exploits this, that. No, I think it's a much more efficient interpretation, this one. Bill Gates privatized part of what Marx called general intellect, the collective intellectual substance which should be out there for all of us to communicate with each other. We are paying Bill Gates a rent so that through internet and so on we can communicate with each other. It's the privatization of what Marx called collective substance of knowledge. It's rent in its form. That's all I'm saying. Let's remain Marxist, of course, But let's, my God, do what Marx himself would have definitely insisted, and what he, up to a point, already saw. Back to the question, nonetheless, I got a little bit lost now. I think that for reasons into which I don't have time to go now, I already talked too much, that maybe we should risk philosophically returning to Hegel a little bit, in the sense, in the precise sense in which I claim at some precise level maybe Hegel was more materialist than Marx. Hegel was not a crazy idealist who thought, oh, out of my brain I can develop everything that exists. No. Hegel precisely was much more open to the contingency of historical development. That's why Hegel prohibited too much dreaming about the future. You know, when he says it's not for us to look forward. I claim that this Marxist traditional, let's call it by its name, eschatology, or what I like to call Hölderlin paradigm. Hölderlin, the German poet, you know, whose most famous line is endlessly quoted by Heidegger, wo das Gefahr ist, wächst das Rettende auch. Where the danger is the greatest, there also salvation potentially arises. This vision of history of, we are now at a dangerous moment, lowest moment, but up there is a chance of a big reversal. And Marx has this, for example, in Grundrisse, how proletarian position is the greatest alienation, but the chance for liberation. I think that our situation is much more adequately described in Hegelian terms. We had a great attempt of liberalization in the 20th century, communism and so on. It failed, but how to avoid the conclusion, oh, so we should do nothing, become cynics, and so on. Hegel has a much more tragic position. Hegel's position is, it has to fail the first time. The problem is precisely not to lose hope after the first failure. If you like popular cinema, then my comparison would be I don't like him especially, but here he wrote a good book, the American philosopher and cinema theorist Stanley Cavell, who wrote a wonderful book on comedies of remarriage. You know, there are many of them with Katharine Hepburn or Hitchcock. Comedies whose story is this one. You have a couple who are first passionately in love, they marry. Then, of course, when the first bliss is over, they divorce. They meet again, and, you know, only the second time when they really get to know each other, it's the true authentic marriage. Like that. You have to marry twice to the same person, of course, to have the real marriage. Maybe something similar, sorry for the obscenity of the comparison, goes for authentic revolutionary process. First, it has to go wrong, and then it's the true test, you know, if you go on, then. But I am afraid now to go too much into it. It's in this big fat book.